The red emergency lights flashed across the pristine white walls of Proxima Centauri Medical Station. The sound of the alarm echoed through the corridors, but most of the staff barely looked up from their work. Emergency alerts were common at the busiest medical hub in this part of the galaxy. Dr. Park Jun sat in his office, frowning at the interruption. His fingers hovered over his research tablet as the station's artificial intelligence spoke through the room's speakers. Dr. Park, emergency in Bay 4, human female in labor with complications. Arrival in 3 minutes. Park sighed and stood up. He was the most famous xenobiologist in the Interstellar Medical Corps. In his 15 years of service, he had treated over 30 different alien species. His books on cross-species medicine were required reading at every medical academy. And yet, here he was, being called for a human birth, hardly worth his expertise. Details, he asked the AI as he walked to the wash station and began sterilizing his hands. Patient name, Yunja. Age, 28 Earth years. Pregnancy, 38 weeks. Complications, unknown, but vital signs show high stress. No medical history available. Park frowned. No medical history was unusual. Every citizen had medical records on file. Immigration status, full citizen, registered to New Earth colony. That explained the missing records. The newer colonies often had spotty data connections. Still, it was unprofessional to travel while pregnant without bringing medical files. Park felt his annoyance grow as he headed toward Bay 4. The medical station was a floating marvel of technology, orbiting the first human colony beyond the solar system. The curved hallways were designed to create artificial gravity, and through the clear ceiling panels, Park could see the blue-green planet below and the red dwarf star that gave it life. When Park entered Bay 4, he saw a small woman with dark skin lying on the medical bed. Her face was tight with pain, and her hospital gown was already soaked with sweat. 2 nurses hovered nearby, looking uncertain. The woman's belly was large with child, and the monitors above her bed showed concerning patterns in both her heartbeat and the baby's. "I'm Dr. Park," he said, not bothering to smile. "What transport brought you here?" The woman grimaced through another contraction before answering. "Private shuttle." "My name is Eun-ji." Park looked around the room, expecting to see a worried husband or family member, but Eun-ji was alone. "Where is your mate?" he asked. "My husband is Kim Ta," she said between heavy breaths. "He's coming soon. Very important man. Need to contact him." Park barely listened to her words. Every patient thought their situation was special, their family important. He had treated actual royalty from the Andromeda galaxy. Some human's wife from a colony world didn't impress him. "Lie still," he ordered as he reviewed the readings on the monitor. Her vitals showed strange variations from normal human patterns. The baby's heartbeat was faster than standard, but steady. "Something's wrong," Eun-ji said. "This doesn't feel normal. Please, I need to speak with my husband. He knows about my condition." "What condition?" Park asked sharply. The AI said you have no medical records. "Special physiology," she gasped. "Modified for." Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and she couldn't finish her sentence. Park frowned and ran a quick body scan. The results made him pause. Her internal structure showed subtle differences from standard human anatomy. Nothing major, but enough to complicate the birth. Her pelvis had slight modifications, and the baby appeared larger than normal for a woman of her size. "Were you part of the adaptation program?" he asked, referring to the controversial genetic modification project that had adjusted some colonists to better survive on different worlds. Eun-ji nodded, still breathing hard. "Yes. My husband needs to know I'm here." Park ignored her request. The adaptation program explained the unusual readings, but it also meant this birth might be more complex than he initially thought. He would need to adjust his approach. "Prepare for possible surgical intervention," he told the nurses, "and get me the file on adaptation program birth variations. One of the nurses, a young woman named Hannah, spoke up. "Doctor, perhaps we should contact her husband as she requests. If he has information about her specific modifications." "I've delivered babies from 17 different species," Park interrupted. "I think I can handle a slightly modified human without a worried husband underfoot. Now get me that file." Hannah hesitated but then nodded and left to retrieve the information. The other nurse, an older man named Da, began preparing the surgical tools. Park turned back to Yunji. "How far apart are your contractions?" 2 minutes, she said. "But something feels wrong. My baby." "I'll determine what's wrong," Park said firmly. "That's my job. Your job is to remain calm and follow my instructions." Yunji tried to sit up. "No, you don't understand. I have special needs during." "Lie down," Park ordered, pushing her shoulder back onto the bed. "Moving around will only complicate things." The monitor suddenly beeped in alarm. The baby's heart rate had spiked dangerously high. "The baby is in distress," Park announced. "We need to move quickly." Nurse Da looked concerned. "Without knowing her specific modifications, we could be taking risks." "Every second we delay is a risk," Park countered. He began preparing a sedative. "I'll make adjustments as we go." "Please," Yunji begged, "just call my husband. The station can reach his shuttle. He has my medical file. He knows what to do." Park felt his patience wearing thin. He had spent years perfecting his medical skills, learning the biology of creatures across the galaxy. He didn't need some diplomat husband telling him how to do his job. "Your husband can see you after the delivery," he said coldly. "Now, I'm going to give you something to help with the pain and slow the contractions." As he moved to inject the medication into her IV line, Yunji grabbed his arm. "No, not that drug. I can't take standard human medications with my modifications." The sudden movement caused Park to drop the syringe. It clattered to the floor, and the precious medication spilled across the sterile surface. "Look what you've done," Park snapped. "That was precisely measured." "I tried to tell you," Yunji said, her voice rising with both pain and anger. "My husband knows which medications I can take. Please contact him." The monitor beeped again, more urgently. The baby's heart rate was now dangerously irregular. "We don't have time for this," Park said. He turned to Nurse Da. "Prepare another dose, double strength. We need to stabilize the contractions now." "Doctor," Da said hesitantly, "if she's telling the truth about her modifications, a double dose could be dangerous." "I know what I'm doing," Park insisted. "Her modifications are minimal. The risk to the baby is greater if we don't act." Yunji continued to struggle on the bed, trying to reach for the communication panel on the wall. "My husband is Kim Ta," she shouted through her pain. "He's the new High Counselor for Human Affairs. Contact him now." Park barely registered her words. Another colony woman claiming important connections to get special treatment. He had seen it all before. "Restrain her," he ordered Da. "She's becoming hysterical and endangering herself and the child." As Da moved to secure her arms, Yunji gave a particularly violent jerk, knocking over a tray of instruments. The metal tools scattered across the floor with a loud crash. Park's temper, already stretched thin, finally snapped. Before he could stop himself, his hand flew out and struck Yunji across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the sudden silence of the room. Nurse Da froze, his eyes wide with shock. Even Park seemed surprised by his own action. Yunji's cheek reddened where he had hit her, but her eyes showed more anger than pain. "You will regret that," she said quietly, all panic gone from her voice despite her continuing contractions. "When my husband arrives, you will deeply regret that." Park recovered quickly, pushing down his momentary shame. "Your husband's title won't matter here. I'm trying to save your baby's life. Now lie still and let me do my job." As if in response to his words, the station's AI spoke again. "Alert. Priority 1 shuttle requesting emergency docking. Identification. Office of the High Counselor for Human Affairs. ETA, 2 minutes. Park barely had time to process this information when Nurse Hannah rushed back into the room. "Dr. Park," she said, breathless with urgency, "I've just received confirmation. The patient's husband is indeed High Counselor Kim Ta. He's arriving now with his personal medical team." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Park's confident face. The High Counselor for Human Affairs was indeed a very important man, the most powerful human in the entire Galactic Coalition. The man who, effectively, owned this hospital and every other human medical facility in the galaxy. And Park had just struck his wife. The medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Park turned, expecting to see a regular medical team. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. Kim Ta stood in the doorway. He was tall, with broad shoulders and perfect posture that spoke of military training. His dark suit was simple but clearly expensive, with the small golden pin of the High Council gleaming on his collar. Behind him stood 4 people wearing the blue uniforms of the Coalition's elite medical corps, and 2 others in the black armor of Sentinel guards. The room fell silent. Even Eunji's painful moans quieted as she saw her husband. "Ta," she said softly. Kim Tae's eyes moved from his wife to the red mark on her cheek, then to Dr. Park. His face showed no emotion, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "What happened here?" he asked. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of authority. Dr. Park straightened his back and tried to look confident. "High Counselor, we have a medical emergency. Your wife arrived with pregnancy complications. I've been managing the situation." "And her face?" Kim Tai asked, still standing in the doorway. "Did the complications cause that mark?" Nurse Dai took a small step back from Dr. Park. Nurse Hannah looked down at the floor. "Your wife became hysterical," Dr. Park explained quickly. "She was endangering herself and the baby. I had to restrain her, and in the process, he hit me." Eunji interrupted, her voice stronger than seemed possible given her condition. "I told him about my modified physiology. I told him to call you. I told him I couldn't take standard medications. He ignored everything I said." Kim Tae's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. He finally stepped into the room, and his medical team followed. "Dr. Lee Soo," Kim Ta said, and a woman with short gray hair stepped forward from his team. "Please attend to my wife." "Yes, Counselor," she replied, moving quickly to Eunji's side. Dr. Park stepped in front of her. "I am the chief cynobiologist here. This is my patient. I know what I'm doing." Dr. Lee didn't even look at him. "I am the lead researcher of the adaptation program. I personally designed the modifications for New Earth colonists, including Eunji. Step aside. This is my medical bay," Dr. Park insisted, his face flushing with anger. Kim Ta finally turned his full attention to Dr. Park. "No, this is my medical bay. This entire station falls under Coalition jurisdiction, and as High Counselor for Human Affairs, that means it falls under my authority." He stepped closer to Dr. Park. Though he didn't raise his voice, everyone in the room could feel his anger. "You struck my wife when she was trying to tell you critical medical information that could save both her and our child." Dr. Park felt sweat forming on his forehead. His mind raced for a way to regain control of the situation. The physical contact was a medical necessity. "Don't," Kim Ta cut him off. "There are cameras in every room of this station. I've already received the security feed." Dr. Park paled. He hadn't considered the cameras. Kim Ta turned away from him as if he were no longer worth his attention. "Sentinels, please escort Dr. Park to the waiting area. He is relieved of duty effective immediately." The 2 guards in black armor moved forward. They didn't touch Dr. Park, but their presence made it clear he had no choice but to leave. "You can't do this," Dr. Park protested. "I'm in the middle of a delivery." "You were never qualified for this delivery," Kim Ta said without looking back. "My wife's physiology is classified level 3. Your clearance is level 2. Dr. Park felt his career crumbling around him. Level 3. But that's reserved for experimental modifications. Dr. Lee finished for him as she examined Unje. Your wife's pelvis has the extended flexibility design, counselor. The contractions need to be synchronized with her augmented muscles. She's going to be fine now that we're here. Dr. Park stood frozen. Experimental modifications were rare and typically only approved for high-ranking officials or their families. If he had known. I wasn't told, he said weakly. Kim Ta finally looked at him again. My wife told you repeatedly. You chose not to listen. The sentinels moved closer to Dr. Park. He had no choice but to leave with them, his legs feeling weak as the door closed behind him. Inside the medical bay, Dr. Lee worked quickly. She injected Eunji with a blue liquid that wasn't in the standard medical supplies. Your muscle synchronization is off, she explained to Eunji. This will help align your contractions with your enhanced muscle grooves. Eunji nodded, relaxing as the medication took effect. The baby heart rate is stabilizing, Dr. Lee confirmed, looking at the monitors. The stress was from the improper medication attempts, not from any problem with the baby itself. Kim Ta stood by his wife's side, holding her hand. I should have come with you from the beginning. Eunji managed a small smile despite her pain. Your meeting with the Centauri governor was important. Not as important as you and our child, Kim Ta said firmly. Dr. Lee looked up from her work. The next contraction will be stronger but properly aligned. Are you ready? Eunji nodded, squeezing her husband's hand. Outside in the waiting area, Dr. Park sat with his head in his hands. The sentinel stood silently nearby, watching him. Other doctors and nurses walked past, some looking at him with curiosity, others with judgment. His mind kept replaying the moment he had struck Eunje. How could he have lost control like that? He had spent years building his reputation, and in one moment of anger, he had destroyed it. A young doctor, Jin Ho, approached hesitantly. Dr. Park, what's happening? He asked. Why are coalition sentinels here? Park looked up with hollow eyes. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Before Jin Ho could ask more, the station's AI made an announcement. Attention all medical staff. Effective immediately, Dr. Lee Su has been granted temporary authority over Proxima Centauri Medical Station by order of High Counselor Kim Ta. Jin Ho's eyes widened. The High Counselor is here, on our station. Dr. Park nodded miserably. His wife is my patient. The woman He couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned on Jin Ho's face. He had heard rumors about a doctor striking a patient, but he hadn't believed them. Such behavior was unheard of in modern medicine. What will happen to you? He asked quietly. My career is over, Park said, and I deserve it. Back in the medical bay, Eunji's labor was progressing well under Dr. Lee's care. The contractions were now properly synchronized with her modified muscles, and the baby's heart rate had stabilized. One more push, Dr. Lee encouraged. The baby is almost here. Eunji gripped her husband's hand and pushed with all her strength. Seconds later, a cry filled the room. The healthy sound of a newborn taking its first breath. It's a boy, Dr. Lee announced, lifting the child for the parents to see. The baby was beautiful, with dark skin like his mother and his father's strong features. His cry was louder than normal for a newborn, another sign of the adaptations that would help him thrive in the colony world's environment. Kim Ta looked at his son with wonder. He's perfect, he whispered. Dr. Lee handed the baby to a nurse for cleaning while she finished caring for Eunji. His lung capacity is excellent. All vital signs show the modifications worked exactly as designed. Eunji relaxed against the bed, exhausted but relieved. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Kim Ta kissed his wife's forehead gently, careful to avoid the mark that still showed on her cheek. I'll deal with Dr. Park later. For now, let's focus on our son. Eunji looked at her husband with serious eyes. What will happen to Dr. Park? He'll face a disciplinary board, Kim Ta said. His actions violated every medical oath and regulation. And the station? She asked. Kim Ta's expression hardened. This incident exposed serious problems, not just with Dr. Park, but with how the medical corps handles modified humans. Changes will be made. The nurse returned with their son, now cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket. She handed the baby to Eun-ji, who cradled him gently. What shall we name him? Kim Ta asked. Eun-ji looked down at their child. Han, she said. It means one in Korean, but also sounds like the English word for our species. He represents the future of humanity. Adapted, evolved, but still human. Kim Ta nodded in approval. Han it is. As they admired their son, Dr. Lee approached with a serious expression. Counselor, there's something you should know. I've reviewed the station's medical protocols. Dr. Park's behavior, while inexcusable, may be a symptom of a larger problem. Explain, Kim Ta said. The xenobiologists here are trained to treat aliens, but they receive minimal education about human adaptations. They're taught to see humans as a single, uniform species, despite the various modification programs of the last 20 years. Kim Ta considered this information. So this could happen again, to another modified human. It could, Dr. Lee confirmed, unless changes are made to the entire system. Kim Ta looked at his wife and newborn son, then back to Dr. Lee. Then changes will be made, starting with this station. Outside in the waiting area, Dr. Park still sat with the sentinels, unaware that his actions had set in motion a transformation that would reshape medical care throughout human space. His mistake would become a turning point in history, the moment when humanity began to truly embrace its evolving nature and the diversity of its own species. 3 days had passed since baby Han's birth. Eun-ji sat in her recovery room, holding her son as he slept peacefully in her arms. The room was large and comfortable, with a view of the stars through a big window. It had been quickly converted from a VIP patient suite into a space suitable for the High Counselor's family. The door slid open, and Kim Ta walked in. Despite the past few days of little sleep, he looked powerful and in control. Only Eun-ji could see the tiredness around his eyes. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, sitting beside her bed. "Better," she said. "Dr. Lee says my recovery is faster than expected. The modifications are working well." Kim Ta smiled and gently touched his son's small hand. "He's strong, like his mother. Have you decided what to do about Dr. Park?" Eun-ji asked. Kim Ta's smile faded. The station's security recordings have been reviewed by the Medical Ethics Board. They've already suspended his license pending a full hearing on Earth. And what about the bigger problem? Eun-ji pressed. The one Dr. Lee mentioned. Kim Ta nodded, his face serious again. "That's what I've been working on these past days. Dr. Park isn't the only doctor with outdated training. The entire medical system needs to change." In another part of the station, Dr. Park sat alone in a small room that had become both his quarters and his prison. He wasn't officially under arrest, but the sentinels outside his door made it clear he couldn't leave. He stared at the wall, replaying the events in his mind for the 100th time. How had he, the great xenobiologist, failed so badly with a human patient? The door opened, and Dr. Lee Soo entered. Her face was neutral, neither angry nor sympathetic. "Dr. Park," she said with a small nod. Park stood quickly. "Dr. Lee, I've been waiting to speak with someone. Anyone." "I'm here under the counselor's instructions," she said. "He wants me to understand how this happened." Park ran a hand through his messy hair. "I made a terrible mistake. I know that. The mistake wasn't just hitting a patient, though that alone is unforgivable," Dr. Lee said. "The mistake began when you ignored her words about her own body." Park looked down. "I thought I knew better." "Yes, that's the problem with many xenobiologists. You study alien species with great care, noting every small difference. Yet you treat all humans as if they're exactly the same." Park had never thought of it that way before. The adaptation program. I knew it existed, but I didn't realize how extensive the modifications were. Because you never bothered to learn, Dr. Lee said bluntly. You've written 6 books about centauri slug biology, but couldn't recognize adaptations in your own species. The truth of her words stung Park deeply. What will happen to me? He asked quietly. That depends partly on you, Dr. Lee replied. The counselor is using this incident to push for changes in medical training across all human colonies. He wants to know if you're willing to help. Park looked up in surprise. Help? How? By admitting your mistakes publicly, by helping rewrite the training programs, by showing other doctors what happens when they ignore human diversity. Park felt a small spark of hope, not for his career, that was likely over, but for a chance to fix some of the damage he had caused. I'll do whatever is asked of me, he said. Back in Yunji's room, a nurse had taken baby Han to the nursery for his regular checkup. Yunji and Kim Tai were now alone. I've been thinking about what happened, Yunji said, about why Dr. Park treated me that way. Kim Tai took her hand. He was arrogant and careless. Yes, but it's more than that, Yunji said. He saw me as just another human. He didn't see the adaptations that make me different, and when I tried to tell him, he didn't listen. That's why the system needs to change, Kim Tai agreed. Yunji looked out at the stars. When we started the colony on New Earth, we knew our children would be different. The gravity, the air, the light, everything there shapes us. The adaptations were necessary. And they make our son special, Kim Tai added. But they also make him vulnerable if doctors don't understand him, Yunji said. What if Han needs medical help somewhere without experts like Dr. Lee? Kim Tae's face grew determined. That's exactly why I'm proposing a new medical protocol. Every doctor in human space will be required to learn about human adaptations. Every medical station will have access to the full database of modification types. Yunji squeezed his hand. Use what happened to me to make things better for everyone like us. I will, Kim Ta promised. Dr. Jin Ho, the young doctor who had spoken with Park in the waiting area, now stood nervously in a conference room. Around a large table sat Dr. Lee, 2 coalition officials, and several senior doctors from the station. You wanted to see me? Jin Ho asked. Dr. Lee nodded. You've been working at this station for 3 years, correct? Yes, Mom. And what is your specialty? Jin Ho straightened his shoulders. General human medicine with a focus on colonist health. I'm not a xenobiologist like Dr. Park. That's exactly why we called you here, one of the coalition officials said. We need to understand if the regular doctors on this station receive different training about human adaptations than the xenobiologists did. Jin Ho thought carefully before answering. We had 1 course on human adaptations during medical school. It was brief. What about here, during your station service? Dr. Lee asked. Nothing formal, Jin Ho admitted. I learned a few things from treating colonists who came through, but there's no structured training. The officials exchanged glances. One made notes on a tablet. Dr. Jin, Dr. Lee said, the High Counselor is implementing new protocols for all medical facilities. This station will be the first to adopt them. We would like you to help design the training program for doctors who, like you, focus on human medicine. Jin Ho's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a junior doctor. You're a human medicine specialist who recognizes the gaps in his own training, Dr. Lee corrected him. That makes you exactly who we need. For the first time since the incident, Jin Ho felt hopeful about the future of the station. A week later, Yunji sat in a wheelchair at the station's shuttle bay. Baby Han was bundled against her chest, sleeping soundly. Kim Ta stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Are you ready to go home? He asked. Yunji nodded, more than ready. As they prepared to board their shuttle, Dr. Lee approached with a tablet in her hand. Counselor, before you leave, you should see this, she said, handing him the tablet. On the screen was a formal document with the coalition seal. The title read, Establishment of the Yun-Ji Kim Institute for Adaptive Medicine. Yun-Ji gasped softly as she read over her husband's shoulder. "You're renaming the station?" she asked. "Not the entire station," Kim Todd explained. "A new medical research center that will be built here. It will be dedicated to studying human adaptations and training doctors from across the galaxy." Yun-Ji felt tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Your experience will help countless others," Dr. Lee said. "The Institute will ensure that what happened to you never happens to another modified human." Kim Ta handed the tablet back to Dr. Lee. "Have Dr. Park been informed of his new role?" "Yes, Counselor. He'll be joining the Earth hearing remotely tomorrow. His testimony about his mistakes will be the foundation for the new training protocols." Yun-Ji looked thoughtful. "Will he ever practice medicine again?" Dr. Lee shook her head. "Not directly with patients, but his knowledge, combined with a new understanding of his errors, will help shape medical education. That may be a more important contribution than his previous work." Their private shuttle was ready, its engines humming softly. The pilot stood by the door, waiting for them. "It's time to go home," Kim Ta said, "to introduce Han to New Earth." As they boarded the shuttle, Yun-Ji looked back at the station one last time. What had begun as a frightening and painful experience had transformed into something meaningful. The start of a change that would benefit all modified humans across the galaxy. The shuttle doors closed, and they left the station behind. But the impact of what had happened there would spread throughout human space, creating a new understanding of what it meant to be human in an age of adaptation and evolution. Baby Han stirred in his mother's arms, opening his eyes briefly before falling back asleep. He didn't know it yet, but he would grow up in a galaxy better prepared to understand and care for humans like him. All because of what his mother had endured and what his father had done to make it right. As the shuttle accelerated toward New Earth, Yun-Ji whispered to her son, "Your story began with pain, but it will continue with hope. That's how progress works, little one. That's how we grow." 5 years had passed since the incident at Proxima Centauri Medical Station. The station itself had changed greatly. The newly built Yun-Ji Kim Institute for Adaptive Medicine now took up nearly a third of the station's space. Its sleek labs and training facilities attracted doctors from across human space. Dr. Lee Su stood at the front of a large classroom. Before her sat 30 doctors from 15 different colonies. On the screen behind her was an image of a human body, showing the various modifications now common across different worlds. "These adaptations are not abnormalities," she explained. "They are evolutionary advantages designed for specific environments. A doctor who ignores them is not practicing proper medicine." Among the students sat Dr. Jin Ho, no longer the junior doctor he had once been. Now he served as the Institute's Director of Human Medicine Training. After the lesson, he approached Dr. Lee. "The new group seems to be learning well," he said. Dr. Lee nodded. "Better than the last. The word is spreading. More doctors want to learn about human adaptations now." "Have you heard from Dr. Park recently?" Jin Ho asked. "Yes. He's still on Earth, working on the 7th edition of his textbook. This one focuses entirely on human adaptations rather than alien biology." Jin Ho shook his head slightly. "I never thought his career would take such a turn." "Sometimes our greatest mistakes lead to our most important work," Dr. Lee said. On New Earth, a colony world circling Proxima Centauri, Yun-Ji walked through a garden with her son Han. At 5 years old, he was tall and strong for his age. His modified physiology allowed him to run faster and breathe more easily in the colony's thin air than an unmodified human child could. "Mom, look," Han called, pointing to a colorful insect flying among the plants. The insect was native to New Earth, but had been modified to help pollinate Earth plants growing in the colony. "It's beautiful," Yun-Ji said, kneeling beside her son. "It's adapted to live here, just like you." "Just like all of us," Han said, repeating what he had learned in school. Yun-Ji smiled. Han's generation was the first to grow up understanding their own adaptations as normal and natural. They didn't see themselves as different or strange, just suited to their home world. Their home sat on a hill overlooking the main colony city. It was a large house with wide windows designed to capture the red-tinted light of Proxima Centauri. From here, Yeonji could see the spaceport where ships arrived and departed daily. Today, she watched for one ship in particular. Kim Ta was returning from a 3-month diplomatic mission to Earth. As High Counselor for Human Affairs, his work often took him away from home, but he always returned with stories and gifts for Han. "There it is," Han shouted, pointing to a sleek shuttle breaking through the clouds. His enhanced eyesight, another adaptation, allowed him to spot the ship before Yeonji could. They walked back to the house to wait for Kim Ta's arrival. Inside, Yeonji checked her tablet. There was a message from Dr. Lee about the latest graduation ceremony at the Institute. Attached was a photo of 20 doctors receiving their certifications in adaptive medicine. Yeonji felt a now familiar mixture of pride and satisfaction. What had happened to her had changed medicine throughout human space. The mark on her cheek had faded years ago, but its impact remained. The shuttle landed smoothly at the private pad near their home. Kim Ta stepped out, looking tired but happy. His face brightened when he saw Han running toward him. "Dad!" Han shouted, launching himself into his father's arms. Kim Ta caught him easily, spinning him around once before setting him down. "You've grown again. Soon you'll be taller than me." "That's the gravity adaptation," Han said seriously. "My bones grow stronger than Earth humans." Kim Ta laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "You've been studying." Yeonji approached more slowly, embracing her husband when he reached her. "Welcome home." "It's good to be back," Kim Ta said. "Earth feels heavier every time I visit." "How did the council meeting go?" Yeonji asked as they walked to the house. Kim Ta's expression turned more serious. "The Adaptation Registration Act passed. All modified humans must now be registered in the medical database, with their specific adaptations clearly listed. Will that cause problems?" Yeonji asked, concerned. "Some colonists might resist being registered." "It's not perfect," Kim Ta admitted, "but it will prevent medical mistakes like—" He glanced at Han, who was walking ahead of them. Yeonji nodded in understanding. They had never told Han the full story of his birth. He knew about the institute named after his mother, but not about Dr. Park or the violence that had occurred. "There's something else," Kim Ta said more quietly. "The council wants to establish similar institutes on 5 more colony worlds. They want you to oversee the program." Yeonji stopped walking. "Me? But I'm not a doctor." "No, but you're the symbol of why this work matters. The Yeonji Kim Institute has become the standard for adaptive medicine. They want you to share your story." "I haven't spoken publicly about what happened in years," Yeonji said. "I know, but there's also this." Kim Ta handed her a small data chip. "Dr. Park sent this. He wants your permission to include your case study in the new teaching curriculum." Later that night, after Han was asleep, Yeonji sat in their home office and inserted the data chip into her tablet. Dr. Park's face appeared on the screen. He looked older, his hair now gray at the temples. His eyes held a humility that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "Mrs. Kim," he began, "I hope this message finds you and your family well. I've spent the past 5 years trying to make amends for my actions through my work in adaptive medicine education. The program I've developed has been approved by the Medical Council, but I don't want to include your story without your permission." Yeonji watched as Dr. Park explained the teaching module. It was a detailed case study of what had happened during Han's birth, including Dr. Park's mistakes and their consequences. It was honest and unflinching in its portrayal of his arrogance and failure. "Your experience has already changed medicine," Dr. Park concluded, "but with your permission, it could do even more. Future generations of doctors need to understand what happens when we ignore the diversity within our own species. Thank you for considering this request." The message ended. Yoon-ji sat quietly, thinking. Kim Tai entered the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. What do you think? I think it's time, Yoon-ji said. Han will learn about this eventually. I'd rather the story be used to help others. Are you sure? Yoon-ji nodded. What happened to me was wrong. But what came after, the institute, the new training, the recognition of human adaptations, that's been right. Kim Ta smiled and kissed the top of her head. I'll arrange a meeting with the council representatives next week. They can present their proposal for the new institutes. 2 weeks later, Yoon-ji stood on a small stage in the colony's community center. Before her sat 100 people, including local officials, medical staff, and colonists. A camera drone hovered nearby, broadcasting her words across human space. 5 years ago, she began, I went into labor with my son. What should have been one of the happiest moments of my life became a nightmare because my adaptations weren't understood or respected. She told the story simply but honestly, including Dr. Park's violent action and its consequences. Today, I'm announcing the expansion of the adaptive medicine program to 5 more colony worlds. Within 3 years, every modified human should have access to medical care designed for their specific needs. The audience applauded. Among them sat Dr. Lee and Jin Ho, who had traveled from the station for this announcement. My son is 5 years old now, Yoon-ji continued. He's part of the first generation of humans born with adaptations who will never know a time when their bodies were considered strange or wrong. He will grow up in a galaxy that understands him. After the speech, as people mingled and discussed the announcement, Dr. Lee approached Yoon-ji. I saw Dr. Park's new curriculum, she said. It's excellent. Your story is already being taught to medical students on Earth. Good, Yoon-ji said. That's what I want. Have you forgiven him? Dr. Lee asked quietly. Yoon-ji considered the question carefully. I've made peace with what happened, and I'm proud of what came from it. Is that forgiveness? I'm not sure. Dr. Lee nodded in understanding. The past cannot be changed, but you've helped change the future. As they spoke, Han ran up to his mother, followed more slowly by Kim Ta. Mom, Dad says we can visit the station next month. Can I see the place with your name on it? Yoon-ji smiled and lifted her son into her arms. Yes, Han. I think it's time you saw the place where your story began. As the red light of Proxima Centauri began to set over the colony, casting everything in a warm glow, Yoon-ji looked at her family and the future they had helped create. A future where all humans, no matter how they had been modified or adapted, would receive the care and respect they deserved.